I'm Cierra Bettens. Welcome to APTN News InFocus. On this episode, a conversation with Mohawk activist, artist, and filmmaker Ellen Gabriel. 35 years ago, thousands of troops from the Canadian military arrived at Kanehsatà, Mohawk territory, west of Montreal, and surrounded it. A standoff between the soldiers and the Mohawk who lived there over the expansion of a golf course would last 78 days. And by the time it was over, a policeman was killed, a Mohawk girl was stabbed, and dozens were arrested. The federal government ultimately purchased the land, but to this day, it hasn't been transferred to the Mohawks of Kanehsatà. Earlier this week, APTN Savannah Craig reported on the anniversary of the siege.
We're not going to forget it. And it's not something to forget because it's not fixed.
A commemoration was held in downtown Montreal to remember the 78-day standoff.
It's not a celebration for us, for me anyways, because Marcel Lemay was killed for a golf course. A man lost his life. So for me, it's a commemoration, especially considering that we were shot at and were almost killed by the Sûreté du Québec.
The commemoration is an annual event held in Kanehsatà, but it's the first time one was held in Place du Canada in downtown Montreal, where more than 100 people gathered.
Coming to Montreal, we thought would be a bigger voice, a bigger space to maybe call attention, have some calls to action, and help us to move forward in Kanehsatà.
Ellen Gabriel, then a recent university graduate, was chosen by the people of the Longhouse to be the official spokesperson for the Mohawk during the siege. Surf through archive footage and you'll see her, day in and day out, talking to reporters on the front lines.
They don't want people to get hurt over a golf course. The Native people are fed up with being pushed around and our land taken.
Ellen continues to fight for the rights of her people, but she's also turned her attention to another injustice, the conflict in Gaza, which Amnesty International and a UN Special Rapporteur have declared a genocide against Palestinians. Ellen joins us to talk about advocating for the rights of Palestinians, parallels in the media coverage of Kanehsatà and Gaza, and the importance of taking a stand. Thanks for being with us today, Ellen.
You're welcome.
So you've done a lot of advocacy, and you're now advocating for the people of Gaza. And I'm wondering if you can talk about when that started and, how that translated from starting as an activist to now.
I knew about Palestine long before October 23. You're aware of the situation, and I've watched and seen how brutal an occupation can be. We as Indigenous people should understand the parallels between the occupation in Palestine and the occupation of Canada or Turtle Island. In fact, some of the first people who came to support us and reached out to us were Palestinians. So I learned about Palestine. I have friends who are Palestinian. When we look at human rights, which is what I've been working in for the past 3 decades, and you see the double standards, you see the suffering of people, and you look at how Canada has become complicit, and in fact Quebec, because they've opened up an embassy in Jerusalem. When you see stuff like that, you know that this is a test, and that this is not normal to kill people. It's not normal to starve babies. It's not normal to bomb civilians. There are international human rights law that say that you can't do it. And to see countries like Canada and the United States cheering on Israel as they're killing, trying to justify it, like anybody who understands human rights knows that there is a double standard. What I am disappointed, and I guess many people must be frustrated as well, is that this didn't just happen in 2023. This has been going on for decades. And to see this suffering, I think, we can't lose our humanity because of politics or what the media tells us as they parrot the Israeli military. It's really, for me, I think it's really scary and it's really dangerous for us as Indigenous people if we are to remain silent, because those weapons are always tested on the First Peoples, on the Indigenous peoples. And we know and we see the state of the world as it is today, the hypocrisy that goes in regards to human rights or violation. Only certain groups can violate the rule of law and get away with it. I think that's ridiculous. So for me, it's really important to say something, to step up. I've watched many states turn a blind eye to the violations of human rights for economic prosperity. And I think that's what has motivated most of what we're experiencing on Turtle Island is greed, land grabs, and why is this still going on? That's what I don't understand, is that you have taken almost everything of the Palestinian people, just as they took so much from our people when they put us on reserves and they put us in Indian residential schools. These are the kinds of things that we should be alerted to, because if they can do that, the next people who are most vulnerable are the Indigenous peoples of this whole world. So it is important to speak up for human rights and not make it a political thing as people would like you to.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned, seeing parallels. What parallels do you see between these two things?
I think they're pretty obvious. It's a land grab. This is a huge land grab that has been supported by Western states. Just as they've displaced Indigenous people to make way for settlers to continue to come and steal our land, or corporations who come to steal our land. In Canada, has this corrupt system of supposed consultations and negotiations, when in the end of the day, the corporations win. I think it's kind of ridiculous for us not to have a critical thought at this time to talk about the parallels, whether it's the kidnapping of children. For us, it was residential school. For Palestinian children, they're abducted and put into a jail. Just the brutality, the nature of the brutality, and perhaps the fact that they ignore us, that we're invisible, that we always have to prove that we have a right to human rights, that we have a right to self-determination, and that our land has never been ceded. And I think that's where we see the parallels, to be dehumanized and criminalized for defending your people and your land because you have a right to. This is something that is one of the parallels that I see, short of putting walls around the reserves. I mean, there was a generation, before us that lived basically in concentration camp-like conditions. We weren't allowed to sell our vegetables to the Quebecois people. There were many laws designed to not allow us to have legal defense, not allow us to protest the thefts of our land. And if they did so, it was a brutal way to confront and kill our people. That's what they've had to do. So the parallels are many, and the fact that our rights are still being violated. They just repackaged colonization, and so if you are a human being, you need to you can see the pain that colonization, settler colonialism has brought, and that the fact that we have survived a genocide, it's still going on, it's still ongoing. And so as human beings, we need to lift each other up, as they say in the Longhouse. How do we lift people up who are suffering, who have had to watch their children die in front of them? For many Indigenous people, children who died in Indian residential school, their parents never knew what happened. And I think that's similar in what we're seeing today in Palestine, that even children, it doesn't matter how young they are, do not have rights, just as in the Indian residential schools. Babies were killed for what? Just because we were seen as less than human. So there's a lot of parallels, and to have an colonially imposed structure like the Band Council, for the governments, colonial governments, to decide who can be the leaders, who are the legitimate ones. I see that also happening to the Palestinian people. So we're trying to defend what's left of our lands, and so those are some of the parallels that I see.
Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to turn to, the media coverage of this. How do you see media being complicit, in both instances?
Well, the media if I could go back to 1990, they didn't know we were even existed. They didn't know that there was a reserve not far from them. We were supposedly disappeared. The images spoke for themselves, but the stories were perceived in such a way to further criminalize the Mohawk people and say, how dare they, go against the colonizer. And so I think the media has just parroted what the IDF wants people to know. I mean, we can see the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation shooting at people, and yet they're denying it, being accused of having human shields when it's actually the IDF that are doing that. And to not even learn about the history of the area, to not even say this is a genocide, that the ICJ has said it's a plausible genocide, or the ICC, and the media continues to ignore the human rights of Palestinians. There is nothing left. They took their homes, they killed their children. Doesn't that mean something? Isn't that newsworthy to say one injustice does not justify another injustice like this genocide? To purposely starve people, to push them into small, concentrated areas where there is no room to breathe. Like, journalists are human beings. They don't need to parrot what the producers say. They need to look at the images and see the truth that is there. To have so many journalists killed and to not stand by them, to not say that Israel is targeting journalists, healthcare workers, and anyone that moves, I think it's an injustice to our history as human beings on this planet. We want the truth to be told, just as we want the truth about Indian residential schools and Canada's genocidal history to be told in the schools, which it's not. So the media has been complicit in the sense that they are not telling the truth, and that they are only telling one side of the story, just similar to what has happened to Indigenous people. So the complicity is when you are encouraging it, the intent of that, of what you're telling people, and not including other parts of that story, is the complicity, because it has allowed people to continue their racism and dehumanization of Palestinians, just as they have done to Indigenous peoples.
You were also present at the student encampments last year, and I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about, what you experienced there and, why it was important for you to be there.
There was a purpose. Like I said, I do have Palestinian friends. I have been watching on Instagram the suffering of Palestinian people. And when I saw the students upholding the rule of law, which their politicians refuse to uphold, and being against and wanting a permanent ceasefire for Palestinians so they can live a quality of life according to the UN international laws. The students are so brave, and I got to know them. I've been going to the demos in Montreal. So it's about relationship building. And if you don't have a relationship with people, it's kind of like there's a wall against you. And the students were open. They want to learn. They wanted to learn about the stolen land on Turtle Island. They saw the similarities or parallels between what happened on Turtle Island to what is happening in Palestine. It's a different degree, mind you, but the students were there to try and stop a genocide. And I think any human who has not lost their humanity would also wants to stop this genocide. And so I went there, supported them. I did a Honda Kariwatekwa. I did a teaching of 1990. And it's to bring that solidarity network closer together, because as Indigenous peoples, we are not listened to. But if we have other people who are the constituents of these politicians, then the pressure gets placed upon the politicians to uphold the rule of law.
Mm-hmm. And, we see on social media a lot of pushback against, people who are supporting Palestinians. Have you experienced that, and why is it important to, maintain courage and, take a stand?
Well, I lost quite a few followers on X and I think Facebook, which is fine. My whole purpose in life is not social media. But I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding of what fighting for peace and justice means. It means you fight for everybody who has experienced that. But when we think about justice, when we think about peace, what are the things that go hand in hand with it? And so there's the strength or the courage to sit in uncomfortable discussions and situations, but to work it through, to have that compassion and understanding for that person and their respect for their decisions. So if I am giving out my opinion of something or decisions, I say that with respect. If you don't accept it, that's fine. But my goal as a Haudenosaunee person is to uphold the great law of peace. And that great law of peace is supposed to be for everybody, just like human rights are universal, interrelated, interconnected, indivisible. So the negative part about being pro-Palestinian, I think, yeah, it's to be expected given the fact that there's so much money that certain groups have to throw around and to control government, to describe what is the definition of anti-Semitism. And for me, anti-Semitism is a true problem, and it should be dealt with. But in this particular instance, if we see the physical manifestation of trauma and to see so many young lives taken unnecessarily, I think that's a sadness and it's a stain on humanity that we all have to bear. We are all complicit, as Francesca Albanese said. Our fingerprints are all over this simply because as consumers, we are using the services of companies that have been providing the tools for Israel's apartheid and the tools for Israel's genocide. And so if we don't speak out, who is going to be next? And the easiest and most vulnerable people, like we're seeing in the United States, are immigrants and indigenous peoples. And so the erosion of international law, the erosion of human rights must be stopped. And we must all care, because that is all our rights as well. When we talk about universal, interrelated, interconnected, indivisible, that's us as one human species on this earth. And all those things that were agreed upon that could improve the quality of life, that could promote peace, those are being thrown into the garbage by politicians who are more worried about how much profit their company is going to make. And for me, that's intolerable. That's exactly what colonization has done, focused on the economics of a society rather than the environment, rather than the health and well-being of the people and the environment. So it's a complicated issue. I'm hoping that more people will take the time to learn their own history, but also learn about all the efforts that have been done to promote and create human rights, international human rights law, but also the efforts that are going against it and why. We need to know the why sometimes before we get to that understanding. But the why is simply greed and fear. You impose this on a population, make them think that they're going to benefit from it, but there is no justice. There can be no justice if people are not schooled and to understand that the violation of one group of people's human rights is also the violation of our rights. It erodes our protection and security under international human rights law.
Ellen, that's all the time we have, but I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and, sharing some of your advocacy that you've been doing with us.
Thank you very much.
Today's episode was produced by Mark Blackburn and edited by Jesse Andrushko. Charmaine Straker is the executive producer of APTN News InFocus. If you have any comments, email them to infocus@aptn.ca. For more APTN News podcasts, visit aptnnews.ca or find us on your favorite player. I'm Cierra Bettens. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.